Hi, sixth graders. Today we are reviewing Unit 1 content on the earliest people on Earth. Our objective is to describe the earliest people on Earth and how they began to farm. So these are the earliest people that we know of, and it's also the earliest content that you'll be assessed on the LEAP, which you're taking in about 4 weeks. So this first age is called the Paleolithic age. I'm going to say that one more time because it's kind of tough. Paleolithic. The Paleolithic age is also known as the Old Stone Age, which is a lot easier to say. It's a time when people lived in small bands and they did not farm. So instead of living in big cities and communities like we do today, they lived in just like small bands of families or maybe a couple of families, usually no more than 30 or 40 people living together. Here we see a picture of what that might have looked like. You see just a couple of people and they're all working together to survive. Still talking about the Paleolithic age, these early people were something that we call hunter-gatherers. And this just described their lifestyle. Women in hunter-gatherer societies would gather food. They would gather things like berries or wild fruits or nuts. And so in this picture here, we see this woman is gathering maybe some wild berries. And the men would hunt. So this man's fishing, this other man is collecting, or he has an animal that he's hunted. For the most part, that is what Paleolithic or Old Stone Age people did. They hunted and they gathered. They were always looking for food. And that's because if you are not farming, and these people were not, they're getting their food by hunting and gathering. If you don't farm, you don't have extra food. So they spent most of their free time just looking for food so that they could survive. They were considered something called a nomad. A nomad is a person who moves from place to place following their food source. They were nomads because they followed the migration patterns of the animals that they hunted for food. So if they were hunting wild boar and the wild boar moved off to another area, they would pack up their tents in removable homes and just follow the wild boar so that they knew they could continue to hunt them. Now, they were not very advanced. They didn't have a lot of the technology that we have today. The Paleolithic or Old Stone Age people are known for inventing fire. That was their greatest invention. Fire was so great because it helped them keep warm, it helped them cook, it helped them fight, and it gave them light at night. So, fire was a really big deal. It made food better and more digestible, it kept people warmer in the colder climates. And so this picture here, we're seeing, this is a temporary shelter. You can see it looks like a tent. So it could be easily taken down to follow the animal herds. We see a small group of people and looks like they're playing around with antlers. So something that they hunted for food and then use the skin you can see here for clothing and for warmth. And then again, here's that greatest invention of the Old Stone Age or Paleolithic Age. It's fire. So ancient history is divided into two, or prehistory is divided into two groups: Paleolithic, or Old Stone Age, and Neolithic, New Stone Age. Now we're going to talk about the Neolithic Age. I always remember that Neolithic means new because they both start with N's. The Neolithic Age is known as the New Stone Age. It's a time when people began to live in settled communities that farmed. So let's take just a quick moment to start comparing and contrasting the two. Here we're saying that the Neolithic people lived in settled communities. That means that they did not live in tents and get up and follow animal herds. Instead, they lived in one place. They settled in one location. And we can see in this picture here, their homes look much more permanent. And this is because they were farming. If you're farming, you can't plant your wheat or whatever you're growing and then just walk away. You need to stay there and tend to your crops until they're finished growing. So in the Neolithic age, people stopped moving around and hunting and gathering, and they began to farm. This allows more people to all live in one area, and it allows cities and civilizations to be developed. Now, we call this time period when people start farming the agricultural revolution. And if we're breaking that up, agriculture means farming, and revolution is a big change. And that is exactly what this is. It's a big change when people start to farm, the agricultural or farming revolution. You might see it called the Neolithic Revolution on the LEAP. They mean the same thing. They both just mean the time when people started farming. Now, one thing to think about with this is that this is a gradual change. It does not instantly happen. Someone doesn't just snap their fingers and all of a sudden everyone's farming. It slowly happened over time through cultural diffusion. So one group would slowly learn how to farm and they would meet another group of people and share that information. And then that group of people would begin farming and it would slowly spread over time. So this happened over the course of thousands and thousands of years. Now, this happened towards the end of the Ice Age. So, this Ice Age is a time when the Earth was just much, much colder. Areas that are hot today were covered in snow. The Ice Age, though, started to end around the time of the Agricultural Revolution, and animals like this woolly mammoth that had been hunted by the hunter gatherers started dying off. They needed cold weather, and without the cold weather, they were dying. So now the big game is dying. Hunter-gatherers needed to find a new way to survive, and the way that they found to survive was through farming. So we see Old Stone Age are people who are hunter-gatherers. They're much more primitive. They're less advanced. And the New Stone Age or Neolithic era is when people begin farming, they begin creating settled villages, civilizations are going to emerge. So the Neolithic Revolution or Agricultural Revolution is a big deal. This is when history starts to really take a change towards what we are today. So a little bit about where did farming originate? It originated all over the earth. You can see it started in different areas around the world. And at this time, there are no phones or internet. So the people over here in Mesoamerica are not calling the people in the Fertile Crescent asking like, hey, how do you farm? People just slowly developed that technology on their own. That was partially because the earth is starting to warm. It's supporting farming. It's killing off some of the big game that people were hunting. And it's also because some areas have people who are traveling and meeting each other and sharing those ideas. So again, it's not an instant change. It's a slow and a gradual change. All right, we're going to watch a brain pop. On your notes, you have a space to compare the hunter-gatherers to the agricultural villages. Remember, this is Old Stone Age or Paleolithic era, and this is New Stone Age or Neolithic era. So as you watch, fill in information to compare and contrast.
Can you hand me the shovel?
Uh-oh.
Dear Tim and Moby, what was the agricultural revolution? From Sam. Well, somewhere around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, humans were living all over the globe in small, loosely organized groups of hunter-gatherers. These bands moved around a lot, hunting whatever animals they could find and using available plants for food, medicine, and even soap. Life as a hunter-gatherer was tough. You had to follow herds where they drifted and pick up and move when the resources of one area were exhausted. Eventually, people in the Middle East, Africa, and Western Asia began to settle down into agricultural villages. Agriculture is the process of modifying the environment in order to use it more effectively. These villages formed when people began to domesticate plants and animals. Well, domesticating something makes it useful to humans. That can include anything from roping livestock to taming a dog to selectively breeding vegetables to make them bigger and more nutritious. So, with their domesticated plants and animals, villagers had a steady source of food. Animals could be used to work the land, as well as supply leather, hides, furs, and fertilizer. Well, experts believe that the very first place where humans participated in agriculture was something called the Fertile Crescent. This area of what is now northern Africa and the Middle East had fertile soil, gentle rains, and long springs and summers, all of which made it an ideal spot for farming. The agricultural life wasn't easy at first. People didn't have the stress of moving around constantly, but they became more vulnerable to elements like weather, and their diets suffered from lack of variety. The early villagers could only grow limited types of food. The people tended to be smaller and less healthy than hunter-gatherer populations. Then there are the issues of waste and disease. There were no toilets or plumbing back then, so towns were probably pretty dirty. And with so many people living close together in filthy conditions, diseases spread easily. It's true, agriculture doesn't seem like such a great development at first, but our lives would be really different if our ancestors had never settled down. For one thing, extra food stocks allowed villages to get through hard times and to feed more and more people. So this new food surplus led to a growth in the population, or number of people in an area. And living in large communities allowed people to specialize their labor. That means they became experts in certain areas and traded with their neighbors for everything else. Instead of having to take care of everything themselves, individuals could focus on what they were good at. This division of labor led to big gains in technology and wealth. As societies grew larger and more complex, hierarchies were established. Those became the earliest forms of government. Today, we can look back on the first agricultural revolution, which is also called the Neolithic Revolution, as a turning point in the history of the world. It was one of the biggest steps in human history, and it led to us covering the earth with our villages, towns, and cities. What? You'd like to specialize in napping? And be king of...
All right, so if you haven't already filled out your graphic organizer, fill it out now. And let's review. So comparing and contrasting the two, hunter-gatherers were nomadic, where the women hunted berries, the men hunted, and they lived in small bands. Whereas agricultural villages, those were permanent settlements. They had specialized jobs. They lived in larger communities and they farmed for food. So we see society getting more advanced as we begin to farm. So, a couple of changes due to farming. Farming allowed people, like we said, to live in settled communities. No more tents, no more hunting and gathering, no more nomadic lifestyle. So, soon towns and civilizations emerged. Farming allowed the first civilizations to develop. So, you guys learned about like Mesopotamia and Egypt, India, China. Without farming, those civilizations would have never been around. So, thanks to farming, we have civilizations. So, a little bit about the importance of farming and how farming led to civilizations. First, farming allowed a surplus of food to be grown. When I used to teach, I would always talk about how I had a surplus of construction paper. One year, all 100 of my students were told by the school to bring a pack of construction paper and give it to me. So I had 100 packs of construction paper. It was thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of construction paper. I could never use it all. I had a surplus of a construction paper. A surplus is when you have more than you need. Farming allowed there to be a surplus of food. So that means now they have more food than they need. Now they don't need everybody to farm. So this allowed different people in the society to focus on jobs other than just gathering food. And these jobs are known as specialized jobs. Specialization allowed civilizations to develop religion, arts, tools, and other important inventions such as writing and the wheel. With specialized jobs, people began to separate into different social classes. So the way this works is first, people have to settle in a river valley. You know you need that river valley for farming. Then you can begin farming. After you farm for a while, you'll have a surplus of food. With that surplus of food, you can then specialize in different crafts. We have specialized jobs in America today. Something like a doctor is a specialized job, a construction worker, a lawyer, a builder. These are people who have one job and they work really hard at it. Now, this nurse is not going to worry about providing food for us because that's not what she specializes in. Same thing with changes with farming. Some people are still going to farm to provide food, but now they don't need everyone to farm. You could have a different specialized job. And with that comes social classes. So society gets divided up where some people have more wealth and power. Like in Egypt, the pharaoh had the most and his priests and nobles had the next most. And others have less power, like unskilled workers or farmers. And finally, we've talked a lot about this year, the requirements to farm. The earliest civilizations needed rivers to survive. That's why all of the early civilizations have a river attached to them. The rivers would give them fresh water and fertile soil for farming. And then finally, to bring water to crops, people would dig trenches and canals. This was called irrigation. This helped bring the water from the rivers to their crops. So this just shows what exactly the river did for these farming communities. In the summer, the rivers would actually flood the farmland. So this right here is the farmland, and we see the water level has gone over to cover it. In the autumn, the water level goes back down. But when it goes down, it leaves behind this rich, what's called fertile soil. If you've ever heard of fertilizer, that's what you put on your plants to help them grow. That makes the soil more fertile. Fertile is good soil for farming. So the water goes down and leaves behind fertile soil known as silt. So they go and they plant. They dig those irrigation canals so that the water can get to the crops. They harvest it. And then in the next summer, it starts over again. Here we see an early farming society. There's the river, and these are those canals. They dig the canals from the rivers all the way over to their crops so that they can water their crops throughout the year. All right, you've learned a lot about the Paleolithic or Old Stone Age, the Neolithic or New Stone Age when people began farming, and just a little bit about how society changed because of farming. You have some review questions. You may begin.